Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Irene Williams. I'm here on behalf of Coverings. Coverings is the largest tile and stone expo in North America. And I'm here with Scott, and he is just presented on virtual reality. He is a marketing pro who knows a lot about emerging technologies. And so many of our audiences here at Coverings, this is a very relevant topic. So we want to get some insights on what's going on in virtual reality. So I'll just start with the basics. Please explain virtual reality to us, understanding the variety of people who might be watching now and might need to incorporate it into their business. So just give us the lowdown.
Okay. Well, like most technologies, it's been something that's been around for a while, but in the last 5 years, it's really come down in price to where it's a more accessible tool. The gaming industry has helped that because you have people. There's a market out there that's buying this for recreational purposes, but there's really been some, because of it coming down in price, there's been some great opportunities for, in my experience, design firms to incorporate this into their design process. It's a way of bringing clients early into a project, early in the design phase, where the client can actually experience. Whether it's a residential project, they can experience their home, or if it's a corporate client, they can experience their office space.
So the benefits of using that as a tool in the design process is it makes the client experience more enjoyable and more interactive for the client. But in addition to that, it can have some cost saving implications because the client can experience the space before anything gets built.
Yeah.
They can make it's still early enough to make changes, where in the traditional process, once things are in motion on the construction site, things can still change, but there's cost and time implications with that. So, but I think really the critical piece is being able to engage clients in that design dialogue earlier. It helps them to be more invested in the process, and I think it's a great tool for architects to be able to convey what they're trying to convey, either from a materials standpoint or spatial design standpoint of what their vision is for what they're trying to deliver for the client. Where with traditional processes, they might rely on a floor plan and a still rendering, and that can be easy for an architect to look at that and visualize what the space is like, but oftentimes the client can't visualize the space to the extent that the architect can.
Yeah.
And then downstream, that creates problems because when the walls start to go up on the job site, the client will show up and say, "I thought this room was going to feel bigger than it was," or or all the carpets installed, or all the tile work's installed, and they recoil a little bit and say, "Wow, that pattern is a lot busier than it looked when it was just a little sample on the material board."
Yeah, interesting. So when you say virtual reality, what comes to my mind is room visualizers, kind of those 3D things, but I'm sure that's just the tip of the iceberg. So could you talk us through some very specifics? So anybody who's new to this or the new incarnations of this, what are some of the tools specifically doing and showing, if you don't mind?
No, and that's, you bring up, there's a wide range of tools that fall into this category. So like the room visualizers, where you could either do, I've seen realtors use it where you can do a virtual walkthrough, which is great, where you can experience a house, and it's definitely a better experience than just looking at still photos. And then even with the room visualizers, where you can place a piece of furniture and have an idea of what the scale of that couch is in relationship to the chairs. But with the, when using, so that's kind of a rudimentary version of the technology. And then, so the next step you have is kind of single point VR, where you might put on a headset or Google Cardboard using a phone where you put the headset on, but it's a fixed point. So you can look around in 360 degrees, but your feet are anchored to the ground. But I think the next step of that, which is where I see so much benefit with the client experience, is when you have the VR headset, but some of the systems now will allow you to set up about a 15 by 15 foot space So the client can actually walk around and experience the space as they would if they were actually walking around in the space.
Wow.
And there's not only aesthetic benefits to that for making aesthetic choices, but you can even use it to make to test out operational functionality decisions based on, okay, well, if that counter is over there and I know that's my prep area and then I need to come over here, you can really get a sense of if that's going to actually work, or if counter heights feel right for what you're doing. And even, as I mentioned in the presentation, this has been used with on healthcare projects where they bring a group of nurses in, they set up a room and bring them into a virtual model so they can stand at the virtual nurses station and check out sightlines and make sure that they can see all the rooms that they're attending to and if that's going to work. And then they can make those changes. In the past, what would happen is they might start to build it and then bring the nurses out on site, and then if changes need to be made, it's very costly. Or they might do do an actual mock-up out of plywood, which still incurs quite a bit of cost. And the same is true for justice and courthouse projects, where the chief judge can really get a sense of what his materials are going to look like in his courtroom and what his sight lines are, and you can sit in the jury box and see what their experience is. So part of what I was talking about in my presentation was we've kind of shifted into this experience economy where clients and patrons have an expectation of having a unique experience. And there's an author named Joseph Pine, and he talks about it being defining the economy that we're in right now as the experience economy, and that people are looking, instead of mass production where items are just step and repeat the same widget over and over again, the same chain store over and over again, more and more patrons and clients are looking for mass customization. They want to feel like what they're experiencing has been customized to them, or that they're experiencing an authentic experience versus sitting in a restaurant that's identical to the one that they ate at in Nashville, but now they're in Orlando.
Right.
Obviously there's economies of scale for the company, and that's what drove those decisions in the past. But now patrons are looking for more, and if you don't want to be competing on price, the companies that have the ability to render those better user experiences and authentic experiences are going to be able to charge more for those experiences.
Yeah, and to stay in the game.
And you're going to have patrons and clients that are seeking that out specifically. So that helps to mitigate what I was talking about in my presentation about the Amazon effect, where people are now really hardwired to find what they're looking for, find the best, cheapest price, and the fastest way to get it to them. And there's not a lot of room to compete if you're just trying to be the fastest and the cheapest. If you want to actually make a living, you want to be rendering those authentic experiences and bringing more to the user experience. And so that
interesting.
That goes for architectural professionals and their process with their clients, because that's something that's being commoditized just like everything else. And it also goes for the clients who have restaurants and stores and even hospitals who focus more on having more of a hospitality experience. And this has been going on for the last several years. It's not a new thing, but shifting away from the hospital just being the most dreaded experience that we could possibly have. Now when you go to most modern hospitals, they've really focused on that hospitality element. So what these tools will allow you to do is test some of those things out in the schematic design phase when you can still have the flexibility to make changes in material and make better design decisions and bring the client along with you and get their feedback.
Right. So a design firm that wants to use this technology, because obviously there's all these advantages that you're sharing, do they purchase their VR equipment and keep it in-house, or do you rent it? Because I would imagine technology changes quickly, so you don't want to spend a ton of money on it and then it need to update a year later, or how do you?
So I have several clients that I consult with, and it's been a mix where I've advised them on starting a program, and so what software they would need to get, what hardware they would need to get, and just processes and workflows, and I've also done that with 3D printing as well. So in that case, they would do kind of bring me on as a consultant to get them started, and then they're off and running. But then I've also had clients just bringing me in for those client meetings, especially as I was saying in my presentation. There's been times where I worked with an architect who had two schemes that they were presenting to the client, and when they were relying on just floor plans and renderings, the architect had a preferred scheme that was spatially it was just a superior design. But utilizing the old client presentation tools of just floor plans and renderings, they weren't able to convince the client. And there were some minor cost implications where the preferred design was a little bit more expensive, and so the client just really couldn't see the value. So I encouraged them to bring them in, do a session with VR, let them experience both schemes, and then see which one they want. And after that session, they went for the preferred scheme.
Yeah.
And it's because they were able to actually experience the space.
Yeah. So interesting. And like we were talking about the customization of spaces. I'm also in marketing in my day-to-day life, and it's so relevant on many levels, so the ability to be able to virtual reality experience, and convince people that, making a unique experience from location, that kind of thing. So what are other applications? Obviously, you're very focused on architectural businesses and design, but we have so many people from other walks of life participating in coverings with manufacturers, distributors. What are some practical, be it a more basic form of VR or a more advanced, because you're talking as you're talking about the healthcare environment and picturing a nurse's station, I'm thinking, imagine a manufacturing line. If you could picture it, and as you're setting up a processing line, do that more intelligently. So that's just one thing, but how can anybody maybe speak to a very basic audience and a more advanced audience apply this? Because it's not going anywhere.
Right. I had a tile manufacturer ask me after my presentation about the tools, and I think what they would like to use the tool for is just to simply lay out the floor space and just test whether the scale of the tile that they're looking at is going to work for the client. So they could they could simply set up a floor space virtually,
right?
Put the tile down, and even you have a lot of control in the material editor to really dial in the reflectivity of the tile or the roughness, or you can really get a good sense of what that material is going to look like, and it can be independent of everything else that's going to go into space.
Yeah, because when I think of a room visualizer, it's still pretty flat in my mind. But you're talking about the reflection and things like that.
Yeah,
so is that technology taking us to where it truly is more lifelike, nuances of lighting?
Yeah, it is. Because as the computer hardware gets more and more advanced, the computing power is going to enable it to render it more realistically. But in that tile manufacturer example, they could use Google Cardboard to do that, and get a pretty decent. They could be able to determine whether the scale of a tile is going to work, or if the pattern's going to work or be too busy.
Yeah,
they could do that, and that in the Google Cardboard piece is simply you model it, you upload it to a cloud, and then you go to a web link from your phone, and then you put it in this cardboard headset.
Gotcha.
But even better if they can do the full VR headset, where you can actually walk around a little bit and really get a sense of how the tile is going to interact. And I've seen materials pulled out of projects before once they were in the construction phase, where the one project in particular, there was a stairwell, and the interior designer picked a pretty busy carpet tile pattern. And once they installed it, the contractor was looking at it, and it was hard to discern where the steps were, and so they had to rip it out.
Not going to work.
But in this type of example, even if you're using the Google Cardboard, you could come to that conclusion before construction even starts.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued by how the potential cost savings, because when you talk technology, everybody often freezes. They think, oh, just investing in that technology is so expensive, but imagine what you're avoiding by using it.
Yeah.
You know, those costs are very real too. So,
and one of the things I stress in my presentation too is it's really easy to become enamored with whatever the new piece of technology is, especially when there's this feeling like, oh, well, so-and-so is using this, so we need to do this, we need to use this technology too. I really like to, when I'm working with clients, to first identify what problems they're trying to solve, and then figuring out which pieces of technology would work to solve the problem and work within their processes. But it's bonus points if it's creating a better client experience as well while you're doing it, and if you're saving money.
Right. So are there any way, like retailers who might be on more of a budget, what are some types of virtual reality that they could incorporate for their, maybe it's a more residential consumer, you know, that kind of thing? Obviously you're talking stuff that would be relevant to commercial installations and maybe larger projects. Is there any way for even smaller businesses to latch onto this and take them into the future a little better?
So I know the realtors have been using some, I think they're pretty cost-effective tools to actually, I think you pay a service to come out and they document the house that's for sale, and it's definitely more effective than just looking at still photos where you can kind of understand the space better. Some of the more exciting things that I've seen, there's a couple startup companies here in Orlando, but there's and also other parts of the country that are really trying to make 360 video really a real viable product. And some of the things that I've seen with that is where you might have a live concert or something, and you set up a 360 video camera, and the idea is that you might be able to sell a virtual ticket to somebody. And so you're using one camera, and maybe it's your favorite group, and they've been broken up for years, and there's just a reunion tour, but it's in California, and you can't make it. So there's companies that are trying to work on solutions to where you might a concert organizer might be able to sell a virtual ticket to where the person sits at their home and they actually have the headset on and they're experiencing the concert, and they can look around at 360 degrees.
Wow.
And experience it more than just watching a recorded flat.
Yeah, so interesting.
So I think there's opportunity for smaller retail companies and
basically they
hospitality industry.
They could find a resource, be it beyond their geographic region, or maybe somebody there who has the 360 camera and they just rent it for their event or their particular need, or to shoot a video, that kind of thing. So they wouldn't have to invest in like owning that technology directly.
And to a point that you brought up earlier, so I do a lot of custom fabrication too, because part of this mass customization is clients want unique spaces, so when their patrons come, they feels like a unique experience. So I work with a lot of fabricators, and it's been much more efficient to test out ideas virtually, and actually it could be a piece of furniture, it could be a piece of wall art or sculpture, but that's modeled in 3D, and you can show it to your client using VR, and you didn't have to actually spend any money on materials yet. They could quickly rule out options or engage sooner in a design discussion about what they like about a design direction or don't like. And so again, that could be furniture. So furniture designers could do that as well. One of the things that's been interesting with the one restaurant client that I've been working with is, so when we set up a space, when I set up a space for this restaurant client, one of the things that we did in this session was I wanted them to experience what the view was from sitting at one of the tables. So we set a chair in the physical space so they could walk up to the table, and we put the chair behind them, like, okay, you can sit down, and you sit down, and you really feel like you're sitting at the table. And one of the things that was important from a design standpoint in this was this client really likes the kitchen to be part of the experience, so they could see okay, if I'm sitting at this table, I've got good line of sight to the kitchen area. So that's, check the box. That's going to accomplish what we need.
Really cool. So like I said earlier, when I first think of virtual reality, because I've been around doing this stuff for a while, it was these room visualizers and things that exist on a website that we were calling virtual reality. Is that even accurate to call those things virtual reality? Because what you're talking about is much more involved and truly immersive.
That is, it's accurate to call it that.
Okay.
And so you just have degrees of immersion. So typically, the more immersive it is, the more expensive it is. One of the exciting things I think will be coming up soon is so currently it's kind of a single person experience, at least on the types of projects that I've been describing. And there's some softwares out there that will allow multiple people to be in a model at the same time. But the last time that I checked, those models were very, because it's so hardware and processor intensive, up until now, you could experience a model at the same time with somebody else in the model and look over and see them virtually. But the quality of the models aren't quite there yet. But I think we're quickly getting to a point where you could have multiple clients or users in the model at the same time and walking around and looking at things. And
how wild is that?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then augmented reality is another thing too, where you would have a headset where you can actually see you'd see the room that we're sitting in now, but there might be some interactive piece of media or a virtual piece of furniture that gets superimposed within the space. So that's just incorporating and blending more of the real environment with digital design and virtual objects.
And how are you seeing adoption of this technology? Are larger architectural and design firms totally on it, and this is standard operating procedure, or still slow go?
I would say surprisingly, on the whole, some of the bigger design names have latched onto it, but I would say on a whole, the architecture industry has been kind of slow to adopt.
Interesting.
And actually, surprisingly, I found that contractors have adopted a lot of these new technologies much faster. And some of that, I think, is just research and development budgets, where contractors seem to have more money to have a department to test things out. But it was kind of surprising. Yeah, you wouldn't. I don't think traditionally expect the contractor to be more on the cutting edge than the design architect.
Where do you think adoption is going? What needs to happen to really take us to where this is something that's just expected in the process versus look at this cool thing we're offering you, we're unique? It
seems to be one of those things where until you, at least for that group, until you experience it and actually demonstrate the value, because it's kind of come out of the gaming industry, I think there's this this initial bias that it's a game, you know what I mean? But I think once you get past that, and it's because there's new pieces of tech every day, and if you're not, especially with architects, because this process is so important, if you're not laying out how it fits into their process and why it's important and how it's effective, they're not going to pay attention to it. But
right.
I've found with the architects that I've worked with, as soon as they kind of see it work in a client interaction, or the other thing that I've experienced is once they try it out, they're actually using it as a design tool themselves to, even though they can, most architects can visualize a space pretty easily, you still don't really know 100%. And so during design, they'll go check out they'll go into their space and make adjustments based on what they're experienced early in the schematic design process. So,
do you see any difference between generations?
Yeah, definitely. So definitely your younger architects just coming out of school are more they're more comfortable with it, and they're more curious and energetic to try it out. Part of the challenge too is because all the tech's been generated out of the game industry for the most part, it's changing, and it's changed quite a bit. But initially, there weren't really established workflows for how an architect would use it. So it's still at the early adoption phase where maybe the workflows aren't all figured out, and you kind of have to. They're figured out enough now, though, or you could buy your equipment and kind of navigate it. But initially, you were kind of taking a leap of faith. And I think for some of the older generation, the old model, even with software like Photoshop and things like that, you would buy your version, and you may not even buy the next version because not a whole lot would change. But even with that software, technology is changing so fast. That now everything's, in that case, is a subscription. So it's, you don't just make,
there you go.
It's not a one-time investment and then you don't have to worry about it.
That's always a concern. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
But that's why if you're focusing on what problem you're trying to solve, it doesn't feel like you're taking as much of a hit if you then have to switch gears to another piece of technology.
But and you're in the business of consulting to help people make the great. So you guys check him out. This is really interesting stuff, and we got to say goodbye here, but thank you so much for your time. Really, really interesting. Thank you.